It wasn't the perfect sunset, but it was the one Kevin De Bruyne got, and somehow that made it even more poignant. This was a game wrapped in blue ribbons, carried by 1,000 Etihad voices who came not just to win, but to witness. You could feel it in the air, thick like the fog of memory. This wasn't just Manchester City versus Bournemouth. This was the last home act of one of football's most brilliant minds in motion. Kevin De Bruyne, the architect, the artist. The one who didn't just thread passes, but stitched areas together. From the moment he jogged onto the pitch, there was this strange electricity. Not quite sorrow, not quite celebration. More like a reverence. Because how do you say goodbye to a player who never really belonged to one moment in time? The ball hadn't even been kicked, and you could already feel the weight of history breathing through the concrete and steel of the Etihad. And when De Bruyne tapped it forward at kickoff, the place didn't erupt. It just exhaled, like holding your breath for the past decade and finally letting it go. This match was never going to be about just the scoreline, though yes, it ended 3-1 to City. It was about emotion, about reflection, about the sheer oddness of seeing De Bruyne knowing the next time this stadium fills with noise, he won't be out there knitting chaos into coherence. There were moments of magic, moments of absurdity, and even moments of violence. 2 red cards, a late Bournemouth consolation, and some spicy midfield collisions, but none of it ever really touched the gravitational center of the day. That center had ginger hair and eyes that always seemed 2 moves ahead of the rest of us. And in classic De Bruyne fashion, it wasn't about making it neat. No fairy tale goal, no last-minute winner. He even missed a sitter, rattling the crossbar like a man doing a theatrical send-off. The script was right there, Kevin. All you had to do was tap it in. But maybe that was the point. He never played football like a man chasing headlines. What he did do was drop deep, conduct traffic, hit impossible diagonals, and stretch the pitch like origami. Even on a farewell tour, he made City hum like a machine someone had whispered poetry into. When he came off in the second half, the stadium did what it had been holding in since minute 1. It rose, loud, emotional, not frantic, but full. Like applause for a final curtain call. Some players get cheers. De Bruyne got something closer to gratitude. And look, I've seen a lot of players bow out. I've watched the legends fade, the icons wave their final waves. But there's something extra tragic about losing a genius who still looks like he could run the game blindfolded. The camera kept cutting to Pep, who watched him go with that look. Not sad, not even proud, just knowing. Like he knew this was the end of an era, not because the club said so, but because the feelings said so. Kevin De Bruyne didn't go out in flames, he went out in full control, the way he always played. And yes, Manchester City won the game. But more than that, they held a funeral for predictability. Because whatever comes next, it won't be this. And that's the kind of thing you don't measure in goals. You measure it in silence, when the whistle blows, and you realize the orchestra has packed up and gone. You don't just replace Kevin De Bruyne. You just hope you were watching closely when he played. It started like a slow storm, didn't it? Manchester City came out in that first half with a kind of simmering intent. Not desperate, not manic, just quietly lethal. Like a chess master moving pawns while everyone else is playing Connect 4. The game opened with Bournemouth holding their shape, and you could almost see their plan. Stay compact, frustrate City, sneak a goal on the counter. And to be fair, they did have early sniffs. Evanilson tested Ederson after a stray touch from Diaz, and Kluivert had a crack from the angle, but it was more nuisance than threat. City were always the ones with the map in their hands. Then came the kind of moment that rips up tactical briefs and turns games into myth. 14 minutes in. Marmoush. A name that sounds like it should belong to a magician, which... fair. He picked up the ball in a space that didn't exist until he made it exist. Kovacic handed it off, and Bournemouth backed off like someone had told them the ball was radioactive. Marmoush, not known for subtlety, unleashed a howitzer from 30 yards out, dipping, swerving, spinning like it was dodging bullets. It hit the net like a meteor hitting water. You could see the disbelief ripple across faces. Not just from the Cherries, but even from City fans who were like, wait, was that legal? You think that's the moment, right? The exclamation mark. But no, the half kept unfolding like a novella of almosts and what-ifs. Bruyne, the man of the moment, the conductor. He should have had his coronation goal. Marmoush squared it, the net was empty, and Kevin cracked the crossbar from 5 yards. And it wasn't even funny. It was human. That's the weird thing about legends. When they mess up, you don't laugh, you just go, ah, so he's not a demigod, just a footballer. But of course, football is kind to those who keep asking. Gundogan made the second goal out of dust and timing, arriving into the box like a ghost in new boots, sliding a perfect ball to Bernardo Silva, who didn't even blink. One touch, bottom corner. 2-0, so calm it was insulting. That was the moment the game tilted from competitive to cruel. Bournemouth had hit the post, sure. Tavernier had crossed to Evanilson, who slid in and almost made it dramatic. But almost doesn't dent the scoreboard. Halftime came, and the scoreboard read 2-0. But it felt heavier than that. Not in numbers, in inevitability. Bournemouth didn't look broken, but they looked like they knew. Like a boxer who realizes by round 3 that the guy across the ring isn't going to slow down. And then the second half decided to have a personality crisis. What began as a well-oiled city procession turned into a late-night drama episode. Kovacic, who had been brilliant in the first half, composed and commanding, suddenly decided to yank Evanilson down with all the subtlety of a nightclub bouncer. Straight red. No complaints. No sympathy either. That's the law when you're last man. It was supposed to get nervy then. 10 men. Just a 2-goal cushion. But Bournemouth, bless them, decided to keep things symmetrical. 6 minutes later, Cook plowed into Gonzalez like he was trying to excavate him. Another red. 10v10. And if you thought that would calm things down, then you have clearly never watched Premier League football. Then came the final nail. Gonzalez, the same man who got leveled by Cook, picked himself up like a footballing Lazarus and scored a peach. Brought it down, shook off his marker like lint, and curled it into the top right corner like he had a deal with gravity. 3-0. Game, set, heritage. Sure, Bournemouth would get a goal, because of course they did. A loose pass, a lucky bounce, Jebbison poking it through Ederson with a touch of chaos. 3-1. Cosmetic. Decorative. The football equivalent of tossing a grape at a charging rhino. The second half had goals, cards, chaos. But through it all, it kept coming back to that first half. That sense that City, even without their best 11, could still press a button and play football from the future. And Kevin, he got his send-off. He got his applause. He got his moment, even without the goal. That first half belonged to Manchester City. The second half belonged to Entropy. Let's talk about the two teams. Because this wasn't just a day for one player or even just for one club. It was a dance between two sides, going in completely different directions, yet somehow meeting in the middle for 90-something unforgettable minutes. Manchester City, the mechanical orchestra. You know them. You've heard the symphony before. Even when they change the musicians, the music doesn't stop. What struck me in this game, more than anything, was how effortlessly City transitioned from heartbreak to hunger. This was a side that just days ago lost an FA Cup final. No trophy, no glory. Pep Guardiola, for the first time since dinosaurs roamed the earth, was looking at a season without silverware. That kind of failure would break lesser clubs. It might even break some decent ones. But City, they just switched the mood lighting and kept moving forward. They rotated the squad like it was a casual Tuesday. Gundogan returned and looked like he'd been pickled in tactics. Kovacic came back and conducted the first half like a man who resented the idea of losing. And then there was Bruyne, who was basically playing with a force field of emotion around him and still managed to look like the smartest person in every room, including rooms he wasn't in. The thing is, City were comfortable, but never arrogant. Their game wasn't cocky. It was patient, almost surgical, like they were dissecting Bournemouth with tweezers, not knives. The kind of team that doesn't just beat you, they re-educate you. They remind you that football can be a thing of horrifying beauty. And then, Bournemouth. Oh, Bournemouth. What do you even do with that? Because for the first 25 minutes, they were in it. They had chances. Evanilson struck the post, Kluivert got behind, and Tavernier looked up for it. But the problem wasn't energy. The problem was scale. This was David versus Goliath, but Goliath had a GPS and a support team. They looked brave. Sure. brave in the way a paper boat is brave for floating near a waterfall. They pressed when they could, tracked runners, tried to push through the flanks, but the margins were so cruel. The pass would be half a second late, the shot just wide, the tackle mistimed, and when you're playing a team like City, that's all it takes. One missed cue, and you're picking the ball out of your net while Guardiola's already planning the next substitution. Still, you've got to give them something. Irola's team didn't fold. Even after going 2 down, even after Cook's red card, they didn't retreat into themselves. In a way, they grew more dangerous in defeat. Jebuson's late goal came not because City were asleep, but because Bournemouth kept forcing the issue. They didn't have a great plan B, but they sure as hell didn't stop believing in plan A. You could see the identity, even in the chaos. The desire to move the ball quickly, to press high, to trust their young players. Huijsen had some guts at the back. Semenyo never stopped running. They didn't play like a team that had already been written out of Europe. They played like a team trying to write one last line into their season script. But identity only gets you so far when the other team has perfected theirs. City didn't just play their game, they weaponized it. And Bournemouth were left to chase shadows drawn in tactical ink. This was not a humiliation. It was a mismatch, but an instructive one. It showed us how far City still are from the chasing pack, even in a season where they've stumbled. It showed us what resilience looks like under pressure, and how even with the oldest starting 11 they've fielded in years, they can still run a match like it's a rehearsal for a trophy lift. Bournemouth, they walk away with pride intact, if not the points. They'll know they were outplayed, but not outfought. There's something in that, but if this was a measuring stick, City held it up, and it was about 3 feet taller than anything Bournemouth had. So let's zoom in. Let's get granular. Let's talk about the players. The ones who made the game spin, the ones who held it together, and the ones who stumbled while trying to keep up. Let's start, obviously, with Kevin De Bruyne. He didn't score. He didn't assist. He didn't go viral with a piece of wizardry that breaks your brain. And yet, he was everywhere, floating into spaces that don't exist in the playbook, making passes that looked simple only because he made them. Watching him was like watching an author reread his last chapter, not to edit it, but to enjoy the punctuation. It wasn't a farewell soaked in drama, it was one of quiet dominance. Like he just wanted to say, "This is how I always did it. Watch closely." And when he walked off, that wasn't a substitution. That was a ceremony. Next to him, Gundogan was a scalpel. No flash, no noise, just incision after incision through the midfield. The man plays like he's allergic to chaos. He created the second goal with such clean geometry it could be taught in architecture school. He didn't just pass the ball, he passed time itself, slowing everything down to his tempo. Then you had Kovacic, who came out in the first half looking like he was owed something. And maybe he was. Left out of the FA Cup final, overlooked, questioned, he played like someone trying to remind the world that he's not just a fill-in. Before the red card, he was phenomenal. Controlled the tempo, assisted the opener, and made tackles that stopped Bournemouth counters before they even formed a sentence. Then he pulled Evanilson down and got himself sent off, from metronome to villain in under 70 minutes. It was Shakespearean, really. On the wings, Marmoush was chaos incarnate. That goal, that absolute missile from a distant postcode, he struck it like he was trying to exile the ball from Earth, and then kept buzzing around like a caffeine-soaked wasp. He made the game stretch. He made Bournemouth panic. He missed a few chances later on, but at that point, he'd already carved his name into the afternoon. Nico Gonzalez, what a cameo. Comes on after Kovacic sees red, gets wrecked by a studs-up horror challenge, dusts himself off, scores his first Premier League goal with a curler so elegant it practically bowed after hitting the net. If football had poetry, that would have been a haiku. And then there was Haaland. The big man had a strange day. Didn't score, didn't dominate, didn't really find the rhythm. It wasn't a disaster. He still drew defenders, still linked play, but it felt like one of those matches where the orchestra played, and the tuba just kind of stood there waiting for its part. Let's not forget the defenders either. Ruben Dias was his usual growling self, throwing his body into blocks like it was a personal insult to let anyone shoot. Gvardiol had one or two sketchy moments, but also showed flashes of that bulldozing energy that made him such a hyped signing. Akanji was the glue, the quiet genius who cleaned up everything while looking like he was thinking about dinner reservations. And Ederson, well, Ederson made saves, claimed crosses, and got mildly bored. Until Jebbison charging through on that chaotic back pass and squeezed a goal past him with the help of a deflection. Not really Ederson's fault. More like one of those moments the football gods throw in for balance. Bournemouth had their own standouts. Evanilson worked tirelessly. He hit the post, pressed like a madman, and made City's backline stay honest. Semenyo was a menace, all elbows and electricity. His shots didn't go in, but his intent was loud. Huijsen, despite being yellow-carded and generally stressed out, showed enough steel to suggest Madrid might not regret buying him. And Tavernier was doing Tavernier things. Running, crossing, being generally frustrating to play against. But most of Bournemouth's performances existed in a state of strain. Everyone doing a bit too much, stretching themselves thin just to hold on. It's admirable. But when you're playing City, effort isn't always enough. Sometimes you need sorcery. In the end, it was the individuals who made the difference. Not just by brilliance, but by awareness. By understanding the moment. De Bruyne didn't need a goal to define the day. He already had the stage. Marmoush didn't need permission to let fly. He just believed. Gonzalez didn't shrink when kicked to bits. He responded with art. This wasn't just a match. It was a reminder that football is written by players. One pass, one tackle, one curl of the ball at a time. And on this day, those stories were worth telling. This has been Across the Pitch. Over and out.